the third edition of the ICIR, ICFJ webinar. And this webinar is organized by the ICFJ Night Fellowship Program in collaboration with the International Center for Investigative Reporting. Now, the ICFJ is the International Center for Journalists based in Washington, but the ICFJ has fellows around the world initiating different journalism projects. So in Nigeria, the ICFJ works on the Fact Matter projects, where we collaborate with media partners that are fact-checking organizations, namely Fact Check or the Bauer, Africa Check, and the Cable. And what we do with our media partners is to help them with digital strategies that makes fact go viral. And also, we also key into the power of influence by building a collaboration among social media influencers and fact checkers to amplify credible information. So welcome again to the third edition of this webinar. We've had our previous webinar on different topics around misinformation and public accountability. And in this edition, we're talking about the issue of social media regulation. And the question is out there, is as simple as it is. Should governments regulate social media? We know with what has been happening recently around the world with social media and election manipulation, and also with misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech. And bringing it home to Nigeria, we're also aware of, the Twitter ban and even internet shutdown in some other African countries. So we believe this is an issue to discuss at this point in time. And thankfully, we have like an excellent lineup of panelists today to do justice to this issue. It's interesting because we have someone from the government, and that is in person of Dr. Garba Abari, the DG of the National Orientation Agency. So we'll be hearing from both sides. And also our lineup of panelists include Madam Abiodun Bayewu, and she's the Executive Director of Global Rights. And we have Mr. Benga Session, who is the Executive Director of Paradigm Initiative. And also we have Nana Onwachuku, an affiliate of the Beckman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. So it's going to be an incisive discussion today. And thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to your comments and your contributions from the audience, because we want our audience to participate as well. So we'll be having the opening remarks, and that would be presented by Victoria Bamas, who is the editor of Fact Check Hub. Before Victoria comes up, I'd like to announce that this webinar is also live on Facebook, and that is the Facebook platform of the International Center for Investigative Reporting. We'll post the link in the chats as soon as possible. So please welcome again, and we employ everybody to participate fully, and also try to follow some basic rules of decorum. If you're not speaking, please just mute your mic so that we don't have interruptions. Thank you. We'll have Victoria Bamas present the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. And you've already even covered most of the basics, so I'm actually going to be very brief. Over time, misinformation and disinformation, with the coming of the new age, digital media and co, it's one major thing that became very pronounced is misinformation and disinformation. So over time, there have been several strategies and different media houses, civil CSOs, governments, and different stakeholders have actually been coming together trying to look for ways to actually combat this misinformation. It's on this ground, on this background, that the ICFJ and the ICIR webinar was bettered. And in the past, like Hannah has already stated, we actually had a series of webinars on this issue. This is the third in the series. And like the first one we did was on gaining trust for the media. We had the Minister for Youth and Sport Development, Sunday Diary, in attendance. We had Fisayo Shembo, an investigative journalist, in attendance, Ejiro Umukoro, a broadcast journalist, and we also have, of course, our very own Mr. Daya Ayeton, that's ED for the ICIR, who were all part of the panelists then. And at that particular point, what we wanted to look at was how the media can be credible, can be believable, so that the people can actually trust it enough to actually go to it for their news, for their information. So the second one, we decided to take it away from the media and took it to the public, the people, what's their responsibility. And the second edition, the topic, the theme we looked at was public accountability in stemming misinformation. This time around, we wanted, because the fight against misinformation and disinformation has to be all round, all hands have to be on deck. So we've actually looked at what the media can do. We felt we should look at what the public can do. What's the public, or what can they bring to the table? What can they do in the stop and spread of misinformation? And at that particular point, we had Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, Onibinde, the founder of Budget. We had Idayat Hassan of Center for Democracy and Development. I also have had Naziru Mika-Elu, that's the editor-in-chief of Daily Trust newspaper. So, and this time around, we actually felt, okay, we've looked at what the media can do, we've looked at what the public can do, and now we're actually looking at the government. The issue of regulation of social media is not something that just started now. It's something that has been ongoing for a long time. It's not just peculiar to Nigeria. Different countries have been doing it. In fact, because of the continuing discussion on self-regulation, social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Instagram, YouTube, they've been coming up with different ways to actually self-regulate. For instance, Facebook entered a collaboration with different fact-checking organizations, whereby any post that was fact-checked and found to be false, they will flag it and probably take it down or maybe reduce the reach. Same also on Twitter. Even WhatsApp was able to come up with different ways that they try to regulate the spread of misinformation and disinformation. So in recent time in Nigeria, the ban placed on Twitter actually resurrected the conversation in Nigeria. Should the government regulate social media? Of course, currently there is a bit of self-censorship by the media platforms. So now we're now looking at, should the government regulate social media? So it's on the basis of this that today's webinar was birthed. So, and like Hannah has already stated, we have an excellent list of panelists who are actually going to do justice to this conversation. And I hope by the end of this, we'll be able to actually have a better understanding and a better way forward on how we should approach this issue. Once again, I welcome everybody to this webinar, and I also thank the panelists for taking out time from their busy schedule to be part of this webinar. So thank you very much. Hannah, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you for setting the tone, for opening the tone for what we'll be discussing today. You know, like you mentioned, the issue of self-regulation and also the government intervening in social media regulation. But again, we have to look at, you know, the context, the African context, the Nigerian context, where you don't have strong institutions. And then we need to draw the line. Where does government regulation come in? What about the freedom of expression? What about the rights of people to express themselves online? So, like you said, we have a fine list of panelists. We'll be doing justice to that. And today we'll be starting with Dr. Garba Abari, and Dr. Garba is the DG of the National Orientation Agency. So Dr. Garba, I don't know if you are ready for us. We would like to take you on, because we know you'll be the first speaker to talk about this issue about social media and government regulation. Should government regulate social media? So Dr. Garba, I don't know if you are ready so we can hear from you, but while we are waiting, I'll quickly read his profile and then we'll take his contribution. And after his contribution, we'll take questions from the audience, and also we'll have questions from our own end as well. So Dr. Garba, are you ready?
Thank you very much. A very good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much,
Okay.
sir. I would just like to do a quick introduction. So Dr. Garba Abari is the Director General of the National Orientation Agency, an organization created to ensure that government programs and policies are better understood by the general public. He has taught political economy, international economic relations, and comparative politics at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. Thank you so much, Dr. Garba. I'm just reading like a brief version of your profile. We are so happy to have you here and we would like to hear your contribution on this important issue. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, everyone, and a very good morning. Let me first and foremost put on record our appreciation to the organizers of this webinar for giving us this opportunity. This is part of the engagements that our country requires at a time like this, where we mobilize all opinions, all expectations, all interventions from different stakeholders in our effort towards nation building. The topic of today, should government regulate social media, is very important, and for us to understand whether government should or government should not, we have to contextualize. We have to contextualize the environment. First and foremost, I agree with you entirely in your opening remarks that a state like Nigeria, and of course like many other developing countries, have very weak institutions. Now, these very weak institutions impact definitely on government and the governmental processes. Why should we, or should we not regulate social media? In a society that is this heterogeneous like Nigeria, that is this complex like Nigeria, but a country that is this big, both in terms of its population and in terms of its landmass, both in terms of its population and in terms of its landmass, it is important that what goes out to the public is such that will integrate, not that which will disintegrate a country that is already divided along religious, along ethnic, along cultural and traditional lines. But what we are all trying to do is actually to appreciate the fact that there is a lot of benefits, a lot of strength in our diversity. This diversity, this kaleidoscope of colors that define the Nigerian nation and the Nigerian character also defines our strength if only we are able to mobilize it for the purposes of national unity and the building social cohesion and the enhancing the level of connectedness, you know, which has actually predated even the coming of the colonial rulers. Nigeria was not a creation of 1914. Nigeria has been created subconsciously through intermarriages, cultural exchanges, trade relationships, commercial relationships, and so on and so forth across different ethnicities and the cultures. Now, why should we be interested in what the social media does? We are in an environment, and that's why the context. This is where the context actually. This is where our understanding of the context actually. Our understanding of the context actually becomes imperative. We are in an era of infodemic, just like we are in the era of the pandemic. We are in an era of infodemic. All sorts of manner of information is in the air, in the cyberspace. We are in the era of simultaneity. We are in the era of internet. We are in the era of. So because the environment is such kind of environment that has to be managed and managed properly. Government must have to, within its constitutional limits, find a way of managing this pluralism that characterize the Nigerian state. And social media of late has been used differently to cause tension, to create social tension, to exacerbate to exploit our cultural diversities, not for purposes of strengthening them, but for the purposes of division. From the perspective of an orientation agency, I have seen this in our sensitization against the COVID-19. As an orientation agency, I have seen this in the events leading up to the 2015 and 2019 elections and the first elections. I have seen this when different groups were saying a section of the country should leave one section of the country, and another section of the country is giving a counter order. This is something which no responsible government can allow to happen. So without actually impinging on the rights of the citizens to free speech, without impinging on the rights, constitutionally guaranteed rights of citizens to freedom of expression, without impinging on the rights of the citizens to freely hold opinion, express such opinions, social media can be regulated to such an extent that it behaves and conducts itself responsibly, you know, because in the context in which we are today, there is more that the social media can do by way of contributing to national growth and development. The very few that are that are agents of division, very few that are agents of disintegration, very few that are agents of causing social disharmony can be combated, can be fought, can be resisted by the majority, who are beneficiaries of social media in trade, in commerce, and for government also to know that in this era of infodemic that we are talking about, government starts a very large chance and opportunity to utilize the social media for engaging citizens, for getting feedbacks, for inputs, for holding citizens to account, for inclusiveness in the political process, for allowing people of vulnerabilities to be heard, and so on and so forth. So my first take before I come back later is that yes, government should regulate social media without necessarily appearing to be guiding. I have already said, I have already given my final stay on that. Okay. Yes, government should regulate social media without appearing to be gagging social media, because the freedom of speech is constitutionally guaranteed. Freedom to hold opinion and express such opinions are constitutionally guaranteed, and therefore government must respect this. But government also has the opportunity, has the responsibility to protect larger national interests. All social media gangsters, I'm sorry to use this word on a webinar, should realize that we must have to have in the first instance a society, a country that we can call our own before we can even have the freedom to express ourselves or to do whatever kind of person that we want to do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your contribution. I'm sure we'll have opinions from people. So if you have a question, you can type it in the chat box, or if you want to say something, maybe you could raise your hand. But first, I would like to take you back to what you said about, the need to regulate social media. You've stated clearly that government should regulate social media, especially in a country like Nigeria, you know, for the sake of unity and the sake of peace. But then you also said that social media should be regulated within the purview of what is constitutionally permissible. So that is within the purview of human rights. But so I'd like to ask you this question. You said government should regulate social media within the purview of human rights. So how do we connect this to the Twitter ban? Because we believe in Nigeria today, Twitter is a platform for the expression of political opinion. But with the ban by the government, do you think this is constitutionally permissible, looking at some of the treaties on freedom of expression that Nigeria is a signatory to? Is the Twitter ban not an infringement on human rights by the Nigerian government?
Well, I think, thank you very much. I think the reasons why Twitter was banned in this country had already been put on the public domain by government, and we do not really need to belabor the matter. The fund still remains, and the government has consistently maintained this position that Twitter is a private organization set up purely for the purposes of profit making, and that it has its own rules, just like the government also as a sovereign, as a government of a sovereign nation, independent nation, has its own rules and has its mandate and the responsibility of creating an atmosphere for peaceful coexistence in the country. Where a social media organization, and not necessarily Twitter, any other at all, whether Facebook or Instagram or whatever, or Twitter or whatever, you know, that really through its own operations desecrates our national unity or allows itself to be used to cause disaffection, to cause disharmony in our social setup, definitely no responsible government will fold its arms and allow that to continue. And this is exactly what the government is saying. We are not banning you, but we definitely have ways and means by which you must agree to operate. Unless you do that, we are not going to allow it. And this is just the matter. No, that's why I say you have given the case in your opening remark of Facebook, for example, that had decided to actually self-regulate. The reason is simple. The reason is simple. This issue of self-regulation does not mean that they are being gagged, but that they understand the dangers of allowing dangerous material to flow in the cyberspace. So when they see this kind of thing, they either plug it down or they reduce its outreach, you know, or they completely remove it. So this is the kind of situation. The same kind of self-regulation must have been the practice in Twitter, but we did not see it in the context of Nigeria. That is the reason. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So I'll just go to the chat box now and see if I have any question from a member of the audience. Okay. Okay, we have some questions, sir. So let me take, okay, I'll read this out from a question from Mr. Dayo Ayeta. And he said, my question to Dr. Abari is, what diverse activity was shared on Twitter that we didn't find on Facebook and other social media platforms? So I guess it's just like the question states, what diverse activity was shared on Facebook that we didn't find was shared on Twitter that we didn't find on Facebook and other social media platforms? Sir, can you respond to that? Do you understand the question?
Yeah, I understand the question, but the point still remains that Twitter was allowing itself to be used by secessionist tendencies, you know, to send out messages, you know, on the social media, on its handle, you know, giving out instructions to secessionist elements to attack government property, to kill security personnel, to cause mayhem in the social and in the political ecology, to do whatever kind of objectionable things against the Nigerian state. Anybody, whether person or institution that constitute a threat to the interests of the Nigerian state, such a person has to answer to the laws as allowed by the statutes, you know, in the Nigerian law books. So this is actually one of the examples that I want to give. And this is a clear example of why government must have to regulate the behavior, the conduct, the manner in which such kind of platforms are used. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'll follow up with another question from Ezekiel Ude, and is what happens to a fundamental right of freedom of speech if you insist on regulating the social media? I feel the government wants to shut the media. So here it's talking about regulating social media and the fundamental freedom of speech. And how do you react to that, sir?
There is no freedom that is absolute. There is no freedom that is absolute. Whatever freedom you have must go with a corresponding responsibility. Simply because it is my freedom to express myself does not give me the right actually to impinge on the right of the other person.
Okay. Okay, and you know, there's this school of thought too, like we have on this in the chat box, and they're like, the word regulated should not even come into place when we're talking about the freedom of speech. So that is also some of the reaction from our audience. I'll check to see again if we have another question before we close it up. Oh, okay. We have a question here what we discussed earlier about the issue of strong institution. So there seems to be a convergence on the need to regulate social media in this country. How well prepared are the institutions of Nigerian states to regulate this platform? So if you, like you stated in your speech, if you have the opinion that social media should be regulated, how do we undo that with the weak institutions that we have in the country? Because we've seen cases where people have been locked up for expressing their opinion. We've seen cases where journalists have been surveyed and people have been locked up even without the recourse to fair hearing for their freedom of expression. So how well prepared are the institution of the Nigerian state to regulate these platforms, this tech platform, like you stated?
And it is the same concern that this question is raising that informs government to embark on all these reforms that you are seeing in our social and economic space and political space. Look at, say, for example, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act is one of the most far-reaching reforms, you know, that government is embarking upon in order to expand the frontiers of the rights of citizens. Look at the reforms that are taking place in the human rights area, and the expansion of the scope of engagement for people to actually not only appreciate the environment and go about conducting their business with the correct attitude and manners and the mannerism, but that definitely, since, for example, the end of the NSAS protest, a lot of reforms are being put in place to allow citizens actually exercise their fundamental rights to freedom of speech, association, freedom of movement, and what have you. And of course, you can give credit to government that it is not a one-night affair to just create and strengthen institutions. Institution building is a process, it's a gradual, it's evolutionary process, and that we can see the evolution, the incremental progress that is being made in different areas because of the reforms that are being put in place.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that submission. And like, I would like to tell the participants, please, it's easier if you type your questions in the Q&A box. I think it's easy to pick the questions that way. So I have a question here, and it's from Dengiafa and Galapu. And it says, greetings, sir. Do you not think that the nature of social media usage in Nigeria is a direct consequence of citizens' disaffection with government? Don't you think social media only amplifies the grievances of Nigerians? If you agree to this, should we not rather deal with the issues of citizens' disconnect with government rather than this way of suppression?
It is absolutely correct that there is a very high level of disconnect between citizens and the government. This is not something which is strange. It's not out of place. Most if you look at the statistics the world over, the ratings between government and the citizens the world over is something which is coming down, even in the most democracies. And the reason is simple. Whenever there is a government in place, especially in incumbent government, citizens tend to put it very highly under scrutiny. And this is one of the reasons. This is one of the reasons why we are seeing what we are seeing. You know, the social media, like I said, is a very fundamental conduit that can be used to hold elected and appointed officials of government to account. I have no problem with that. And there is no plural democracy, in fact, any form of democracy at all that will not allow the media to be used to hold its elected and appointed officials to account. It's a very welcome development. But what I am saying is, before we can hold a government to account, before we can hold an elected or appointed official to account, we must have to have a society in the first instance. There must be a country. We must have a country. But we cannot allow a situation where we allow the use of the social media to get to a point where we get into a war, and then because some of these people simply just feel that they can cause war, and the next thing will happen is they will just watch the country engulfed in conflagration, and they will be watching from the comfort of their homes. And this is actually a far-fetched assumption, absolutely, because they can do that. You know, by the time the country is up in flames, you can't even get your way to the airport before you can think of getting onto the next flight and out. You know, so what we are saying is we must have to have a country in the first instance before you can even hold government to account, before you can even have a government to criticize. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. You know, we have a lot of discussion at the chat box, and, you know, with what you said about we need to have a country first before we can have a country to criticize. I'm sure many people have disagreements, or maybe many people disagree with that option of maybe protecting the country at all costs, even at the cost of human rights, even at the cost of, you know, shrinking the civic space. But it's been an interesting discussion hearing from your side. And like I said, we have lots of interesting discussion in the chat box. Maybe later would give an opportunity for people to actually, you know, open up. We'll have that later as part of the agenda where you can just speak directly, and we'll give you a chance to make your contribution. So thank you to Jonathan Ugbal. Thank you to Abdul Mahmoud for your contribution. You know, we've had, I don't know if you have even been able to follow the comments in the chat box, you know, people disagreeing on the fact that the actions of governments do not suggest a sustainable framework for building institutions. That is according to Jonathan, and it's like what we rather see as strong individual politicking. And also, Mr. Abdul Mahmoud here is saying, you know, that the social media space is sovereign and is peopled by citizens who are the real sovereign. So when government seeks to regulate the social media, it's merely is attempting to, is it securitize freedom of expression or the speech or acts of citizens? So these are some of the reactions that we have. Let me see if we can quickly take this last question, and then we'll move on to other panelists. Okay, sir, if you are still on ground to take this question, I'll just read it out. Is the lack of decision-making framework in internet shutdowns and access to information, such as those of Zamfara, Twitter, Abuki FX, not a deliberate plot to build strong individuals instead of institutions?
Well, Abuki FX has already responded to what has happened. Their response in the public domain. I am not going to respond to that. But what is happening in Zamfara, ask the ordinary person in Zamfara if he feels, rather than being on the social media and be consistently be subjected to the wanton killings that he has been subjected to in the last few years, you know, against the very temporary setback that he is suffering. Ask him if there is going to be a choice. Because I am before Zamfara, I am from one of the most security challenged parts of this country. I am from the northeast. I live in Maiduguri, and I have stayed in Maiduguri for a whole year without a single what do you call it? Media outlets to use for a whole year. No MTN, no Glow, no internet, no anything, no voice, no data. But I did not complain because I thought that was in my larger interest, because I knew the consequences of allowing the insurgents to continue in the way they were going, having suffered so many personal losses, you know, as a result of the activities of the insurgents. It got to a point where we in Maiduguri could not even bury our dead. We could not even go to bury our dead. It was that bad. So please, those of you living in Lagos and the other areas, don't allow us, please, to respond to our current realities. We know what we are going through, and ask the ordinary person in Zamfara if he would rather continue with the situation as it is, or he will just he is better off with the temporary closure of and the shutdown of all the media services in order to have the bandits dealt with finally.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I am talking now, not even as a government official, but somebody who has actually suffered from one of the most security challenged part of this country. And of course, I have seen the benefit of the closure of the shutdown of telephone services in my own area. Throughout the insurgency, I did not have any cost to leave Maiduguri. In fact, as I'm talking to you now today, my family still lives in Maiduguri. My family to date lives in Maiduguri. We have never had any reason to leave Maiduguri or to run away to anywhere, because we felt we needed to stay there to give people actually the hope that there are others that need to stay around. And of course, we stayed around. Now we are getting the insurgents coming in their thousands to surrender, simply because they have become war fatigued.
Okay. Thank you so much for the submission. I think we have a lot of response here, and if we keep going on, we'll take up all the time, and we won't really have time for the other panelists to share their insights. So thank you for participating as a panelist in this webinar. I'm sure we'll keep the discussion, and we'll keep talking and discussing and debating till we'll find solutions that can help to build strong institutions in our country. Thank you so much, Dr. Alba, and we enjoy you too. If your schedule permits, if you can stay till the end of the program, so that you can also hear the thoughts of the other panelists and also be able to hear the opinions of other participants. Thank you so much. So quickly, I'll move to the next presentation, and that is the next speech, the next remark, and that will be from Ms. Abiodun, from Mrs. Abiodun Bayewu. And I'll just read a short one. Okay, sorry for the error. So we'll hear from her. And okay, Ms. Bayewu is the ED of Global Rights, a human rights organization protecting the rights of marginalized populations. She is the co-chair of the steering committee of the African Coalition for Corporate Accountability, and a former women's law and public policy fellow at Georgetown University. Thank you so much, ma'am. It's a pleasure to have you here. You've been an inspiration, and it's good to finally connect with you and hear your thoughts and insights on this important issue. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Anna, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Barry. Some very, very interesting points you make there, but I'll start from Zamfara. Please don't ask me to ask the people of Zamfara what they prefer. They can't speak to me right now. I can't connect with partners in Zamfara. Zamfara is also a state in which I work. They have been denied that freedom of information and of speech. It's very difficult for people in Zamfara right now to call for help if they wanted to, because they do not have access to the telecoms. So while we might justify that and say that government is winning this war, as they say, when you ask the hunter and the lion, once the hunter tells his tale, that the lion also doesn't get a chance to say what happened exactly in the jungle. The jury is out on Zamfara. But let's also note that a lot of these terrorists, and I will not call them bandits, a lot of these terrorists that are ruining our country also have access to high-powered telecom facilities that bypasses the regular facilities. And at the end of the day, that the grass suffers. But then whose country is it, and whose argument is this? Dr. Barry had said, whose country? And then he had asked the question, is it the country of the gangsters? The gangsters are also Nigerians, and that's why Section 39 of the Federal Republic of Nigeria's Constitution guarantees their right to freedom of expression, including the freedom to hold opinions and receive and impart ideas and information without interference. That section also provides that people are free to establish and operate any medium for the dissemination of information, ideas, and opinions. But then it gives the provisos that this has to be regulated by government, and that in a democracy in which we believe that we've been in the past 22 years, that we should not restrict this except by law. The big question is, why are we having this conversation when the Constitution says that the government has the power to regulate media? Social media, having more recently joined that media and having recently become more influential in that media. This conversation is going on because in the June of 2021, let's start from June, which is the latest incident. In June of 2021, the social media platform, Twitter, was banned in Nigeria on the 4th of June. And that the federal government had also directed the NBC to commence the process of licensing all over the top media services in the country. And that by June 10, just a week later, all social media platforms and online service providers were asked to apply for broadcast services. And our Minister of Information had said, the problem with Twitter is this, that the Nigeria social media space was being used for hearing information that endangers the life and the security of the majority of citizens in Nigeria. And he had also cited Articles 24, 25, and 26 of the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, which was problematic when you think about the reasons why Twitter was actually banned in Nigeria. Twitter was banned because Twitter had removed a post by the president, which had said that it will, referring to the civil war and to be secessionists in the southeast of the country, and saying that it will deal with them in a language in which they understand, which was overarchingly arching issues of the Civil War all over again, and really just inflaming the polity. Who is government protecting when government protects regulation? I think that we should also think about previous attempts. In 2015, you had a frivolous petition bill, which was then sponsored by the Deputy Senate Leader, Ibn Nahala, in the Senate. And the Senate had actually sent it before the Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights, and Legal Matters, which recommended in the long run that the bill be withdrawn, stressing that if it passed into law, it would affect the anti-corruption war of the federal government and do more harm than good to President Buhari's administration itself. And also that, of course, that it was contravening a lot of laws that were already in existence and also replicating a lot of things, the Cybercrime Act, the Criminal Code, the Penal Code, and that we already had enough laws regulating freedom of expression and the media in Nigeria. That wasn't enough. By 2018, the chief whip to the Senate, Senator Sabi, had also sponsored the hate speech bill, which brought a lot of public outrage. The bill had things like to commit, anyone who committed an offense under the bill was liable to life imprisonment, at a point even recommended death by hanging if it caused the loss of life. That wasn't enough. In 2019, then we had the Protection from Internet Falsehood Manipulation Bill by the end of 2019. And it was then said that it would help to curb fake news on the internet. But if you were to read the provisions of this bill, it was actually protecting politicians, that you couldn't speak against people that were in government and politicians, and that if they lost an election because you spoke against them, that you will be punished. And so my big question again is, who was this law protecting? And we need to look at the larger regulation of the freedom of speech of the media in Nigeria. In 2019, Nigeria had ranked 120 out of 180 countries in the World Press Freedom Index. The five that we shifted to, we shifted from 115 to 120, sliding down by 5 spaces. And it's because we've constricted our civic space, the ability for citizens to express themselves on this medium. We will also recall that in 2020, that the Minister of Information had also reenacted the National Broadcasting Commission Code to include hate speech. And in that context, that it made punitive measures to the code and has already imposed sanctions. For example, you had AIT, Arise TV, Channels Television being punished for the unprofessional coverage of the NSAS protest at Lekki Tollgate. And also by 2019, and this is between 2015 and 2019, not less than 11 journalists were undergoing prosecution for criticizing government or exposing corruption in government. Agbaja Lingo is one of them. You had Abiri Jones. You had a lot of people, nameless, faceless, and a lot of people who were still behind bars, but actually speaking against government or demanding accountability to government. The big question is, do we regulate or do we not regulate social media? The big debate is, do you regulate freedom? To some extent, I do agree that we need to regulate freedom. And these are the reasons why I think we need to regulate how freedom is accessed. One, because of when it comes to information, we have issues with disinformation, we have issues with misinformation, we have issues with malinformation. And also we need to think carefully about how do we deal as a public, as a country, with the issues of disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. We think back to the Ebola crisis, where suddenly you had a lot of people in hospital because they had been bathing and ingesting saline as a means of preventing Ebola. With that disinformation, misinformation went out there, and you've got a lot of misinformation as well on social media that's caused a lot of crisis. But at the same time, we have to think about how do we infringe on free speech and freedom of association, as you would see in the instance of regulating social media in Nigeria. We also have to contend with the fact that while we talk about regulating the media, the censorship of the media in Nigeria, the fact that they're regulated by embassy, NCC's regulation of the telecoms, that social media influencers are able to reach even more people than radio stations and TV stations, which the Constitution asks government to ensure that they regulate. And that traditional media also provides content, editorial overview of the content produced, but that with social media, that this is more difficult. And so these are things that we need to think about when we think in terms of media. But then other reasons why I think that we need to regulate is that if we do not, we regulate every part of life, let's be honest. We regulate food and the type of food that you have access to, the type of education you have access to. Government has to step in to regulate in spite of the fact that you have access to private education. The only reason why we regulate is to ensure that we take out toxic content, that we are able to remove content that will be damaging to the polity. How then do we do this? I think there are many ways in which to regulate, but that we have bigger problems in Nigeria to deal with. The first one is the relationship between government and its people. Government in Nigeria is very caught up in the optics of being seen as being right, and will silence anybody or will try to control the way the narrative is handled in the media, social media, conventional media. We'll try to manipulate that. And we've seen this time and again. Designating terrorists as bandits, for example, that control of language is also controlling the way in which the war against terrorists is being fought in this country, and is actually making things worse. There is very little trust between the government. The government does not trust that its people will support them. The people of Nigeria do not trust that their government speaks for them and fights for them. And the government has given evidence and proven time and again that they are not a government for the people, and that they will rather regulate how they are seen. But let's be sure of this. So while government makes a lot of noise about national security, about unity and peace, you cannot regulate national peace or unity. You can regulate how people access the public space, but you cannot regulate unity. You can foster unity. What government is failing to do is create a counter narrative, and is creating a narrative that is also very divisive. They have put everything in the security box, and by putting everything in the security box, government is rapidly losing agency with the people of Nigeria. Government itself needs to provide accurate and timely information to counter disinformation, malinformation, and misinformation. And that government itself needs to accept democratic norms, that the people, including the gangsters, have a right to state how they want their country to be run. On a good day, what Nigerians want is to have a space that works, a country in which they can call their own. And democracy itself is a participatory process. So whether you want to hear what people have to say or not, people have something to say, and we must say it. What we must ensure we take out is the ability of people to manipulate information to become toxic in that space. And the only way we can do that is by ensuring that platforms are able to effectively put out standards. We need to push for platforms to put out standards and of transparency and data protection out there. And it's also the responsibility of platforms to ensure that they're able to immediately remove toxic and malicious content. You've got countries like Canada and France imposing fines on platforms which fail to remove malicious content within 24 hours. What Nigeria did was totally remove platforms And for example, you've had news platforms being blocked because they reported certain types of corruption in government. You've also had Twitter being banned because government claims that it is giving airtime to secessionist groups. You've got Twitter ban, and then we fail to think about how Twitter ban has affected Nigerians. We talk in terms of money, but I also like to talk in terms of life, that Nigerians are losing their lives because of the Twitter ban. I'll give an example, for example, with the fight against COVID. Most Nigerians got their information from Twitter because that's where NCDC has been able to put out real-time information, and that this information has been shared time and again. Once Twitter was banned, there was a direct correlation between Twitter being banned and the upsurge in COVID cases. Why? People did not have the information to say, hey, COVID is bad, let's behave ourselves. We also do not have information that protects citizens. Citizens were able to go on social media to also ask for help, to also point out where service providers were not, whether in government or in private sectors, were not being able to do that. Now, at the end of the day, this is what has happened. We have deepened the divide between government and citizens, and the divide between citizens. And no country can exist that way. If we must build a nation where peace and justice shall reign, then we must develop a system where government is able to put out accurate information, is able to put out information that is tenable and is able to make a country work. So the unity of Nigeria is not about social media platforms. It's also about the way in which government itself is making security issues worse, is making national unity issues worse, and is distancing itself more and more from citizens. I'll stop there, and we could take questions, and I know we're coming back later to me. Thank you, Anna.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ma, for your contribution, especially speaking to the reason why there should be proactive disclosure of information from the government in order to stem misinformation, and also noting that we cannot regulate unity. I think that is an important point that we need to consider as we address this issue. We'll have questions, but I quickly need to bring up Mr. Benga, and maybe after his presentation, then we'll take the questions. So please, I'll kindly implore that you stay on a little bit more so we can take both questions. So I'll quickly like to bring on Mr. Benga Sesson. I'll quickly just read a brief introduction. Mr. Benga Sesson is the Executive Director of Paradigm Initiative, a Pan-African social enterprise working on digital inclusion and digital rights through its offices in some African countries. He is also a non-resident fellow at the Digital Civil Society Lab at Stanford University. Prior to starting Paradigm Initiative, he led the Lagos Digital Village. He originally trained as an electronics and electrical engineer at the Obafemi Awolowo University, and he has completed executive education programs at Lagos Business School, Oxford University, and other leading universities around the world. Thank you, Mr. Benga. We'll have your contribution. Thank you for joining this discussion.
Thank you, Anna, and thanks to everyone for joining this conversation. I will do my best. I'll keep this within the agreed time. My own interest to do that. Let me start by saying that I wish it's great to have the DG of the NOA here. I've heard him defend some of the actions taken by government earlier, but I just wish that the Nigerian government would spend as much energy on doing its real work as it does spend on seeking to regulate social media. If you count the number of man hours that the Minister of Information, the Minister of Comms, and Digital Economy and others have spent on the issue of social media regulation, I think we could have used that better on actually, getting the work done. And speaking of regulation, right from the bat out, I think I need to say this. The reason why many of us speak against regulation in Nigeria is not because regulation is wrong. It's because of the context. It's because regulation is defined in Nigeria has clamped down. Abiodun, thanks to her, mentioned many of the bills that have been, attempted in the House, the frivolous petitions bill and all of that. If you look at the text and the provisions there, including existing laws like the cybercrime law of 2015 that should address cybercrime, the application of it by many government institutions has been to focus a lot more on clamp down on citizens. Regulation should ideally be about creating standards, which is why social media platforms and others already have some of the standards, and countries across the world. I've heard, references to, countries like France and India and the USA and, some other countries. The difference between what Nigeria has done and what every other country has done is that all of them have gone the route of legal provisions, judicial oversight, and legislative processes. But Nigeria has, by fiat and by the announcement of the minister, decided to shut down social media, which is in Nigeria. To date, coincidentally, this, as I speak to you, the ECOWAS court is sitting. I was part of the call earlier. The ECOWAS court is trying to determine if the Nigerian government took an illegal action by suspending Twitter. And you can already see that the argument of the Nigerian defense lawyers has been first an attempt to delay the process, and on the other hand, saying that because Nigerians are using VPN, the ban is not effective anyway, so maybe Nigeria has not done anything wrong. Because in reality, clamp down is what the Nigerian government has been pursuing. And, by the way, and I'm glad that Fire Initiative has been working in this area for a while. We, as far back as 2013, went to court to challenge government decision on surveillance, which is an aspect of this regulation conversation, because there were no guidelines. It was just, okay, we want to do it and we will do it. And in doing many of those things, the Nigerian government flouts its own laws. It's very clear that the reason why, this whole Twitter punishment has happened is because of the ego. And I have dared to say this on some platforms, that it's based on the ego of just two men, Mr. Muhammad Buhari and Mr. Lai Mohammed. Because this is the reason why you ask yourself, why was this action meted out to Twitter and not to other platforms that deleted the same tweet by the president? If indeed the reason why the social media actions are being taken is because of IPOB, as was claimed, and others, then there are existing channels to pursue that. And I hear things said about Nigerian uniqueness. Nigeria is a big country, and we are as big as India. I hear that Nigeria is a cultural country. We have many cultures. The problem is not social media. The problem is actually bad governance and impunity. Some of the biggest culprits of fake news or hate in Nigeria occupy government offices today, but they've never been punished. So if you don't punish those who commit crimes, how do you expect others to obey? So if indeed we have existing laws that can take care of that. But the problem is impunity. We talk about security, we've shut down telecom networks here. I'm sure that, even Mr. Gavabari knows that it's ineffective. It's the reason why we've jumped from one plan to the other. First of all, we said register SIM cards. Everybody register SIM cards. Did it stop terrorism? No. We said connect to NIN. People are connecting to NIN. It didn't. Now we're shutting down. And as we're shutting down, people are buying SIM cards from neighboring countries. And as Abiodun mentioned earlier, people that you're trying to stop, some of them have access to sophisticated equipment. So the people who end up suffering are the citizens that you are supposed to take care of according to the Constitution. When we are ready to have a real conversation about regulation in Nigeria, not this clamp down nonsense, when we're ready to have a real conversation about regulation, then we begin to talk about issues of legality. What is the legal basis of the action of the Ministry of Information for suspending Twitter? What is the legal basis of suggesting that anyone who says, where is the president? Is he sick? Is he okay? Should be punished? What is the legality behind saying that freedom of speech is guaranteed. There are restrictions to it, but there are conditions for that restriction. Legality, proportionality, necessity. Is it legal? Is it proportionate? Are we trying to kill a mosquito with a machine gun? Which is clearly one of the things that I see the Nigerian government do a lot. Somebody makes a comment in the Southeast, you label the person IPOB, and then you send the DSS after the person. And guess what? What you do when you do that is you create a black market for some of the things that you are not correctly addressing. There's a new movie, you say it does not support our national security, you ban it. You've made it more popular. The other principle is necessity. Is it necessary? And necessity means, have you explored every other means before now coming to say you want to restrict social media or you want to do the things that will limit the freedom of people? I've said this before, the problem is not really social media. I hear government officials say all the time that before you can even have freedom of expression, you have to have a country. You should consider yourself lucky, government officials, that Nigerians are resilient. And I say that with all sense of responsibility, because if you really want to have a country, then government will do its job of protecting citizens and providing good services. The social contract has been breached by government successively, and people have found a way around it. This is the reason why our citizens, even though we are angry at the illegal and irresponsible action of government in shutting down Twitter, we went to court. We didn't do anything, that will measure to the level of the anger. We've seen that the people that have even been affected the most, apart from citizens, businesses are losing money. The numbers are out there for anyone to go and search for how much Nigeria, the economy is losing every day. But it appears to me, and for someone who has worked in the tech sector for a while, it appears to me that Nigeria does not mind cutting its nose to spite its own face. And it's very sad. The ICT sector, including platforms and agriculture, were the two sectors that rescued Nigeria from a recession. And those are the sectors that you are now going after and saying that killing that sector is what will make Nigeria survive. NCDC went off Twitter. We stopped seeing information from them, even the national agency. And this is the reason I want to close by speaking to the need to move away from sycophancy of institutions to independence of institutions. It is a shame in a democratic country like Nigeria, institutions of government like the NOA, like the NCC, or other, like NITA, cannot advise government and say, government, Mr. Mohammed, we know you want to do this, Mr. Pantami, you want to do this, but in the interest of conversations, I can bet that the NOA has suffered from the ban of Twitter in Nigeria. You can deny it, but the reality is that we were following you, we were following your conversations, we were seeing all of the things, including propaganda for the government, which was done by other institutions. Now, that is no longer available online. So who has cut their own nose? So when we want to have a conversation about regulation, let's also have a conversation about independence. Institutions like NCC and NIDA should advise government and say, listen, we know you want to do to solve a problem, but have we explored every necessary means before we now go to this hammer and nail solution? Everything that the carpenter sees, it wants, you won't hammer it. Every time, everything is national security. But we know it's not really honestly about national security. At times, it is about the security of, the tenure of the administration or looking good or propaganda and things like that. I am glad to have a conversation about regulation. We've put out documents about this Paradigm Initiative. We'll continue to engage in the conversation. But three clear things that I will close with. Number one, regulation must be about creating standards and not clamp down. If it's about clamp down, then the answer is NO with an exclamation mark, no. The second point is that we cannot solve a problem at the same level where we created it. Nigeria is the way it is today, not because of social media, but because of irresponsibility of many government institutions. So when we want to fix this problem, proactive disclosure of information. If a government official is traveling abroad because they are sick, why don't you say it? Why do you want to wait for the rumor mill to start guessing if they are dead or not? And the third, and I think the most important, is do not take unilateral actions without consulting other stakeholders. The reason why regulation conversation in Nigeria will not proceed is because government has approached it as a father-to-children relationship. It's not true. You're not our fathers. You are the people appointed to serve us. So we need to have a conversation if we are going to talk about regulation of social media, how should we do it? If you really want to do it well, present a bill in the National Assembly and let's debate the bill. Democracy is about the contest of ideas and not about Abuja forcing all of its, ideas down the throat of children. Nigerian citizens are not children. Nigerian citizens are more than happy to have a conversation about regulation, but we must do it right. Is it necessary? Is it proportionate? Is it legal? Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the passionate presentation, for bringing up the point and from the perspective that you have mentioned, about the need to work on the psychology of institutions. Institutions should be independent, and also how government should tackle this issue ideally. Thank you so much, Mr. Benga. It's really, really interesting to hear the points that you've presented. I'm sure we'll have a lot of opinion, a lot of questions from the audience. Please remember that you can type your question in the chat box, or ideally you can type it in the Q&A box so we are able to moderate easily. And again, speaking to some of the points that you've raised, but I'll just like to get your opinion on this. There's been the issue of the responsibility of the social media platform as well. So especially looking at the fact that a platform like Twitter does not even have an office, and they don't have like an office in Nigeria. They don't have a presence in Nigeria. What would you say is the responsibility of the platform, especially in the Nigerian context, especially as it's related to maybe stemming misinformation or guarding against hate speech online? Are the platforms, are they doing enough? When you look at what they do and how they are held responsible in countries like the US or in the European Union, do you think the platforms are doing enough?
Clearly, platforms are not doing enough. A lot of institutions have made this very clear. I was part of the process that had a conversation, with Facebook, eventually leading to them setting up what is now known as the oversight board. But clearly, the reason for setting up the oversight board is because Facebook has not done enough. Platforms must do more. But the beautiful thing about what platforms are doing is that platforms are subjecting themselves to national laws and are having conversations with civil society. Meanwhile, the opposite is what the government is doing, taking unilateral decisions. Clearly, platforms need to do more. And by the way, the fact that a company is not registered in Nigeria is a very ironic conversation for the government to have. Because if you're really as attractive as a country as we claim to be as a giant of Africa, there's no reason why Twitter should have skipped over Nigeria to go to Ghana. But the reasons are very clear. Cost of doing business in Nigeria, the fact that if Twitter had an office in Nigeria, the SSS would have done to officials what they've done to me a few times. Come to your office, try to break things down, force you to come and visit them and to ask questions and to answer questions for the things that you're trying to do in support of the country. So yes, social media platforms need to do more, but right now, this conversation is about some of the, I don't pay taxes to social media platforms, so I have the choice of removing myself. And I've done that for some platforms that I don't agree with, to remove myself from there. But I can't do that for Nigeria. I'm a Nigerian citizen. That's the only passport I have. So, and I pay taxes there. So this is why this conversation for me needs to primarily focus on the Nigerian government and for them to do the right thing and to stop, please, creating a climate of fear and clampdowns when the rest of the world is creating a climate of innovation. Countries that Nigeria needs to please do better than some of these illegalities that we're promoting.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll just go back to the chat box, and I think there's Kendi Adebega who is echoing what you just said, that if Twitter had an office in Nigeria, their office would have been visited by DSS. That's not the light side, but it's an important point to note. So I'll go back to you, Ms. Bayowo, if you are still here, and I'll just like to take you on what you said about regulation. Now, I understand that recently the human need for civil organization and also media organization to self-regulate, especially looking at how social media platform has been used to spread misinformation in Nigeria. So how do you think civil society organizations can self-regulate their use of social media to curb misinformation and hate speech?
Thanks for that question, Anna. And I think that if we listened carefully to what Benga said, it's already said a lot of these things. First, that civil society organizations have been at the forefront of combating misinformation and hate speech on social media. So to think about regulating our use of social media, for me, is quite problematic. We are the only opposition that government has. Now, if we then are the only opposition government has, and if our pledge is to the call of Nigeria, we will speak for Nigeria, not for a government. And we have continued to do that. We've been careful with our language. We've also asked citizens to be very circumspect about the way they use language on social media. But then I go back again to what I said before, and also what Benga said, that what government needs to do is to ensure they put out accurate information out there, that they stop the need for optics and they get down and do the real work. If you want unity, work for unity. If you want a country in which people are happy, work for a country in which people are happy. What Nigerians ask for is good governance, an end to corruption, to access to food, to livelihoods, to be able to live peaceably in their own communities, to be able to also speak their minds and participate in government. Once government does that, by regulating itself, we would have a working Nigeria.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Yes, thank you. Back to the chat box, and let me see this question from Idris Kalma. Okay, maybe it's just a comment. The question of responsibility in relation to regulating social media spaces in Nigeria should also be expanded to the citizens. The citizens are at the receiving end of all the drama between policymakers and companies that own the social media platforms we're talking about. And I think this comment speaks to one of the issues that we've discussed in previous time, and that is talking about the role of the citizen in stemming misinformation or in stemming hate speeches. So this also speaks to what we've talked about in the past. So we'll come back to more questions, but I'll quickly like to bring the next speaker. I think it's good to have the speakers share their presentation, especially since we'll have Dr. Garba Barry here. So, we could have you can hear back and hear some ideas and opinion from members of the civil society and advocates that are doing interesting work in this space. So I'd like to bring on Nana Nwachukwu. Nana, if you are here, thank you so much. So just do
Sorry, I'm having some internet challenges, so I may not use my camera, but I'm glad I have a nice picture that anyone can look at.
Okay, that's great. So Nana,
thank you.
Nana, okay, yeah. So Nana, what is, can you, okay, just a little while, let me just do a brief introduction, then you'll have the floor. Nana Nwachukwu is an affiliate at the Beckman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. She has over 12 years experience working on economic policy, governance, digital issues, and civic engagement. Thank you so much, Nana, for joining us. We'd like to, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much, everyone. There's been very interesting and passionate opinions on social media regulations, all of which I agree with, except the one from the government angle, right? I've heard conversation, I've heard him say, I've heard the DG say that Twitter was suspended because it sought to bring disunity amongst Nigerians, as well as paying people My concern is that the government does not seem to be very clear on exactly what has gone wrong with social media. And I felt like the government simply picked easily on something it could lay its hands on immediately. When it comes to social media regulation, I've never heard Nigerian government try to actually regulate. To regulate means to guide, to show how things should be done, why it should be done right, to help, advocate for the rights of the citizens, to ensure that the social media companies are looking into protecting the privacy of its citizens, are ensuring that the citizens are getting the best of what is required or what it offers other countries. The Nigerian government is not doing any of that. If it comes to, let's take it issue by issue. So on the false information, disinformation, misinformation angle, Twitter in different countries have different features. You're able to make the reporting spectrum for Twitter and also other social media platforms are a bit different depending on where your IP address is coming from, right? You're able to flag something as false information from a different country. You're able during elections to flag and ensure that this is a false account or this information is not coming from an accurate source. But for Nigeria, that's not possible yet. The Nigerian government has not engaged Twitter's policy team to make these things possible. Because if you're looking to regulate a platform that's mostly and highly self-regulatory, it means that you're having conversations to move forward, to include features, digital features that will safeguard not just your citizens, but the unity you so much advocate for. The Nigerian government till date has not done that, right? On the economic angle, the Nigerian government has not engaged with Twitter on how to expand reach, right, of businesses, of medium and small businesses in Nigeria. The Nigerian government is not looking at that. Facebook during the pandemic rolled out different features, directly engaging with business owners. The same digital media community, the same activists engage with these platforms, with these social media companies to be able to ensure that medium and small scale businesses have a certain type of feature. The shopping feature on Instagram came through engagement and advocacy by the private sector. The Nigerian government did not do any of that. We have the digital rights bill that's been traipsing through the legislature for so many years now. The Nigerian government is not interested in the privacy of its citizens. One of the biggest allegations that's been shown at Facebook, right, has been that on issues of privacy. That's not the Nigerian government's concern. Nigerian government's social media regulation is simply about do not embarrass Nigeria's corrupt politicians in public. That's it. This is the whole entirety of it. It's not concerned about the safety, which is so much talks about. Let me tell you why. Soldiers who have been fighting in the Northeast took to Facebook a few times to talk about the mistreatment of soldiers fighting against the insurgency in the Northeast. What did the Nigerian government do? It court-martialed them. Activists had to advocate and prevent those soldiers from being sent to their deaths. Why? Because their protests, they used social media to protest because they are saying to you, we want weapons, we want support, we require mental health support to be able to carry out the work that you have given us, right, to do, to be able to fight back, to push back, to be able to unite the country that we all own. The Nigerian government is not interested in that. It was more interested in the embarrassment that was caused to the military. Not the military as a mind, but to the military bigwigs. So it's confusing when a government official says that we should ask people in Zamfara, in Borno, we should speak to them. Those same people in Zamfara and in Borno have spoken out. They have yelled using social media, but the Nigerian government did what it does best, sent out a notification to media houses, requesting them not to pick those type of information from social media to broadcast, how then do you want the voice of those people to be heard? So it is very convenient to use the trauma of people who are suffering from the regulation that the Nigerian government has imposed to make a case for corrupt politicians, because that is what it is. We're making a case for corrupt politicians. Every bill that has come out, there's the latest one, the bill that is attempting to require people who use blogs or who use other platforms like YouTube, requiring them to have some form of registration. That is the most silly thing anybody can think of. It's the most silly thing. Why? Because we're in an era where everybody is thinking of blockchain relationships. But what we're thinking of is, how do we clamp down? How do we ensure that these people don't have as much freedom as they should? Just to put it directly to the DJ, if he's still here, right? What freedom does for an economy is success. Freedom breeds success. Your people are able to think uninhibited. Your people are able to compete with people external, uninhibited. Digital technology is, well, in the manner of government speaking, it's the next oil, right? It's the one thing that guarantees that your people have. Nigeria is looking to pull in revenue. This revenue comes in form of taxes, it comes in form of levies and the rest. It comes in form of, what's it called, FDI, right? And this can only happen if you can have human resource that you send out to other people to bring in those things for you. This means that somebody sitting in my house where I'm seated in Nigeria can comfortably work in the US and deliver. This regulation has made an aspect of my work very difficult. I have to use VPN to do work. I don't work in Nigeria, but I've had to use VPN to be able to access work. But if I decide today and say, you know what, maybe I should pack up my load and move to a different country, Nigeria loses my taxes. But you're not thinking in that way. You're not looking at those things. You're more concerned about not embarrassing corrupt politicians, and emphasis on corrupt. Because if there's nothing for a government to hide, then there's no problem about putting out, being more transparent, being more open to the things that it puts out. Now you're talking about Twitter providing support to people who want to disintegrate Nigeria. The Nigerian government put out a tweet. That tweet was aimed at disintegration. The same unity that the Nigerian government so holds dear and so argues about. The president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria put out a tweet that was targeted and directed at disintegrating Nigeria. And what did patriotic Nigerians do? They reported that tweet. And when they reported it, it was pulled down. Yet the Nigerian government has a problem that something that was unpatriotic was taken away from the media space. What Nigerian government should have done was whoever put out that tweet, because we want to assume that it was not the president, should have been queried. But we didn't do that. We went on the offensive for something that could have caused a war, as in using the words of the DG, right? It's very unfair that each time the government thinks in terms of regulation, look around. If we think in terms of tax regulations, it's about getting people who are defaulting to, hauling them or kicking down their doors. Nobody is going to them to say, what's your challenge? How can we help you? When we think in terms of regulation, as much as driving licenses, we think about getting people to pay bribes or getting people to, go to the new, mobile courts, even for things they can defend themselves against, right? We're not thinking in terms of what was the problem. Are you trying to get to somewhere? How can we help you? It's always about having a hammer and a nail each time. And it's very worrisome. I don't want to spend all my time to rehash things that other panelists have spoken about, but I want us to do an introspection, right? As government officials, this is speaking on behalf of government people. I want government people to do an introspection. Even if the people who do not understand how social media works are in charge of information and communication in the country. Even if they come to speak to you about the reason they're taking those actions, there's a reason you hire staff. Government offices have research and development departments. Why don't you go to those research and development people and ask them questions about what really is the problem? It's unfair that we keep repeating the same tripe, which is incorrect, misinformed, every time we talk about why government is regulating the space. Because everything that you have said here, sir, with respect, is incorrect. There's not a single fact. And then the highlight of government's regulation is misinformation. This is the point where I will stop my presentation. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you so much, Nana. Thank you for those interesting points. And you also, emphasize the Amal and the nail trend, which is very worrisome that Mr. Benga mentioned. And also the fact that, okay, why can't the government talk about regulating maybe privacy or surveillance? Why is it free speech? Thank you so much. And I think, I don't know, Dr. Garba, Dr. Barry, if you like to react, because we've had a lot of, should I say, a lot of perspective tackling the government on this issue. And some of those perspectives, if you ask me, are quite practical. So I don't know if you really want to react to, because I see that you've been really engaged in the chat box, and that is very interesting. So I don't know if you quickly want to react before we take more questions from the audience, and then we open the floor for participants to contribute.
Thank you very much, everyone. I actually have listened to everyone, and I'm happy to say that I'm the richer from this webinar. I'm actually the richer. But I still insist that while from the perspective of Benga in particular, Benga, yes, from the perspective of Benga in particular, what I have said, I can see that the goals, the perspectives are different, but our goals are the same, that of creating a better society that works for all. That works for all. And this is why I say I'm the richer, because government needs to be spoken to. And it is just like speaking truth to government. It's like speaking truth to power. And the speaking truth to power is what we require, so that elected and appointed functionaries are held to account. But then, my point still remains that social media regulation does not necessarily mean a clamp down. And this is where I take a departure from Benga's intervention. It does not. In fact, it is the Nigerian media that sees this as a clampdown. At the risk of actually sounding, well, not immodest really, but I have to say that perhaps within the context of what we see, the media space in this country is largely free. Largely, I'm not saying 100%, but it is largely a free media space. It's largely free. The Nigerian media is the one that says any form of regulation is a clampdown. And I say, no. Regulation can only happen and be made meaningful where it is contained, where it is operated within the ambits of the law. There is the right of citizens as guaranteed by the Constitution. There is the right of the citizen as to hold opinion and to express such opinions. But there are also certain rights and privileges that must not be seen to be absolute. We must, first and foremost, self-censor. I, for one, for example, I should censor myself. Whatever I receive on my WhatsApp, for example, it's not what I will just go about sending. But this idea of everybody is now a journalist, everybody is now a disseminator of information, simply because you have a smartphone and you just wake up one day and you concoct a story and you send it down without thinking through the consequences of this. This, I think, no society should accept. But all you have said, all the other interventions that other people have made about the social media not being the only means of combating insurgency and the terrorism and all forms of insecurity, I agree. But I have also seen it as one of the means. It is not absolutely the means, but it can be one of the means. For example, like the example I gave, I have been an itinerant researcher since the insurgency started in 2002. That was long before I came into government. That is long before I came into government. I was able to track information. I was able to record happenings like almost on a daily basis, because I know that one day such kind of information may come handy in the for government and for policymakers. But the point still remains that we have fought this war against the insurgents, for example, for 13 years now, without completely bringing the war to an end. But I have seen how it started, how it grew, how it reached its crescendo, and how it is being degraded now. Like I have told you, in all of these years, I have had no reason to be out of my degree. If I had to be, it is simply because this time around, I have to be in Abuja to do this work. But for every 2 weeks, I have to be back to Maiduguri to see my family. At times, at the very, very high risk to personal safety and the water. But I still insist, however, that I'm the reader from this webinar, and I will allow people to continue in the way they are doing things. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Abari. Yeah, so I would like to quickly move on. I'll just go to the chat box, and I think there's some interesting contribution. And there's this contribution from Rosemary Ajayi providing some context to President Buhari's deleted tweets. So she's like, it's important to note that Buhari's 1960 tweet was a quote from a video at an event attended by Mainstream. And also that Twitter initially took down the tweet, but not the video. Querying the social media manager would be unfair. And she continues, it's also false that Kano/IPOB has made Twitter its platform of choice. Video platforms and radio are key tools. We also have other divisive actors like Grandson who use YouTube and Facebook, but appear to have escaped sanction. Just chipping this in because I know Rosemary has done and continues to do great research in this area. So before bringing it back, like I said, we would like to give participants a platform. Maybe if you want to say something, it would be better if you can just indicate by raising your hand. You use the raise hand function. Okay, there's a question here. Okay, before that, I would like to go back to Ms. Bayo and Nana Wanchuku. So there's this question earlier in the chat box, and it's like, how can governments balance the freedom, or how can we balance the freedom of expression and interest of the state to prevent and protect the national security? So how can we balance freedom of expression and interest of the state? We would like to hear your perspective. I'll start with Ms. Bayo before reaching out to Nana.
So how can we balance the freedom of expression and the state? The security of the state, the safety of the state, the welfare of the state. There's only one state, and it's the state that belongs to the people. Section 14(2)(c) of the Constitution says that the primary purpose of government is to ensure the security and welfare of all citizens. So when you talk about that, we're still talking about the welfare of the same citizens, the protection of citizens. You cannot protect people from themselves. What you need to do is ensure that you create a context in which people can thrive, which we have not created in Nigeria, or rather government has not created in Nigeria. You can try to work on ensuring that you have a level playing ground where businesses can thrive, where people can have access to jobs, to information, where people are able to work effectively. So there is really no context between protecting the state and allowing people access to information, because it's also participatory governance, that you cannot decide the destiny of a people for themselves, but that they have to participate in what will work for them, what constitutes safety for them, what constitutes prosperity for them, what constitutes welfare for them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Nana, can we have your perspective?
May I just quickly just intervene, just slightly for a minute, please.
Okay, you can go on.
Yeah, I agree with my sister, this very much the recent speaker. And that is actually the crux of the matter. We also have to further contextualize this conversation within the realities of what is really the Nigerian state. It's a state that actually is a state that is so completely incapacitated, both in terms of its productive and in its distributive functions. Now, this lack of capacity is what we are seeing that is manifesting in almost all facets of our national lives. Is it in the provision of social services? Is it in the protection of lives and property? Is it in the creation of jobs? Is it? You continue to ask, and this is really the issue. And therefore, the convergence between government, civil society, and all other stakeholders, makes it therefore now necessary to begin to engage. How do we begin the process of recreating, recapacitating, and raising the competence level of the state so that it can meet the expectations of the citizens in terms of its productive and distributive functions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And if I would like to quickly follow up on that, maybe if you can just answer in a minute, because I need to take Nana before we close. There's a question from Paul, and it says, what are the roles that the NOA has played in protecting Nigerians against disinformation and cyberbullying? So
many. We have had a lot of roundtable with social media bloggers. We are now doing, we are doing a fact-checking training where we intend to, for example, train 37,000 fast checkers around the country over a couple of years. We have just done the flag off, go around all the 60 political zones. On the 14th of October, this October, 14th of October, we are taking the second leg of the fast checkers training. In terms of cyberbullying, this is an issue that is very, very dear to the NOA. The NOA is in partnership with Google, for example, and we are also partners with Facebook in training people to protect data, so that, because we have realized how very vulnerable Nigerians are, especially both old and young, where personal data that is not properly actually protected has led to a large number of very unsavory stories that have been told. Look at the high incidences in society. So we are creating this kind of things by going to schools, for example, to create awareness among school children. These are some of the issues that the NOA is involved in doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Nana, can we have your submission, especially regarding how we can balance the freedom of expression and the interests of the states, and probably if you chip in your closing remark.
Thank you very much, Anna. Again, I will go back to if citizens are not aware what their rights are, it's very difficult, and because it's very difficult for them to draw the line, and it's also very easy for government to move the lines, right? It's very important that we start focusing on our digital rights. What rights do Nigerian citizens have, or what rights do they have on the web? How do they handle digital transactions? This is very critical, and until we address that, we'll continue to have problems. And also, a word of advice to government actors when selecting bloggers and people they interact with. It's important to reach out to researchers, people who have been seen to do the work, right? Even if their voices are very critical, even if their voices are sound negative to government intentions. It's very important because those people have seen different sides of the spectrum, and they're able to provide better insight, and they're better able to direct government on how to engage with social media companies. Because I hear that the government is engaging with bloggers and also having, while it's laudable, it's important to know what bloggers they're engaging with. On the other spectrum, it's important for government to take evidence-backed decisions. If you decide to cut off a channel in the name of regulation without proper evidence or weighing what the cost of doing that will be, it's going to be difficult for you to walk back, because the publicity of the stupidity becomes greater. So it becomes more embarrassing to walk back, harder on the citizens, harder on government, and all the actors involved. Really don't have much to say, but thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for your contribution. And like Rosemary said here, there's a need for the governments that change should begin from the governments, because of course, like we have known, and even some of the research that I've read, even some of the investigation that has been done, that the Nigerian governments at federal and state level, they fund disinformation campaign, especially on social media networks. So that is something that we should even take cognizance of. I don't know if at this time, if we can still take contributions from members of the audience. Okay, the time is 12:50, 12:52, we'll be closing soon. So if you have submission from members of the audience before we take the closing remark. Okay, and if not, I don't know if the panelists, if we would like to make maybe like a final submission or something like that.
Thank you very much. Let me say that this conversation should not stop here. We should carry it to a higher level. I would also want to suggest that we try and organize something similar and invite the Minister for Information. That's one. Two, the engagement between civil society and government must be consistent. It's something that is required. I personally, and I don't think government sees civil society as opposition. This kind of platform brings a lot of ideas, and such kind of ideas will go in a very long way to add value towards government policies, programs, and activities. As an agency of government that is responsible for communicating government policies and activities to the people, I think my perspective today, the perspective actually is wider for me, and that's why I say I'm the reacher. And of course, I want to assure you that the report from this webinar will be communicated personally. I will want to share my own report with the organizers, the same report that I'm going to send forward to government, for policy guidance and for policy direction. Once again, I thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much, sir. And we also like to explore further opportunities for collaboration, especially as it regards to training fact checkers or other activities of the agency. I know there's a lot that governments and civil society organizations can do together. I'd quickly like to bring on Mr. Abdul Mahmood. He's a participant. Mr. Abdul, you can quickly make your contribution. I hope you can do that. Mr. Abdul Mahmood.
Okay, I've just unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, thank you very much for letting me on this late. Quickly, mine is actually a response to the remarks of my good friend, Dr. Abari at the other end. Let me also salute all the panelists here, Nana, Abiodun, Benga, and Abari himself. I have a slight disagreement with Abari, where Abari conceptualizes, the state as sovereign. My slight disagreement with him here is this: the social media space or that virtual space is also a sovereign space because it is occupied by citizens who are sovereigns. The argument Abari poses here is basically making the state a higher sovereign than the citizens, and that is where I disagree with him. True, if you look at the way that space is constructed, it's a physical space and also virtual, because wherever we sit and we construct that social media space in which we transport ourselves through our devices, that space that we create in the virtual becomes both virtual and physical and also sovereign. Can the state regulate it? Yes, the state can regulate it because there are arguments in all sorts of literatures on the powers of the state. But when we are talking of the Nigerian state at the moment, the question individuals like me who pose is, whose state, whose nation state are we talking about? Is it the nation state whose powers, whose structures have now been personalized by individuals and who now construct the state in a mode and character? That's an argument we can take forward to other platforms. Two, whether we like it or not, self-regulation of the space takes place. The argument I oppose here is a theoretical argument, and this is the argument. Because we have a totalizing power in one individual today, President Buhari, who has constructed our state in a particular way that represents his own values. Those who support him now construct that values in the light of the values of Buhari. So when they go into that state, they regulate themselves in a manner that is consistent with the values of President Buhari. And that's what I've constantly called the Buhari effect on our politics. And I cite one clear example to make my point clearer. People go into the social media space, i.e. Twitter today, to defend the banning of Twitter itself. And it is ridiculous because those who defend the banning of Twitter are using VPN to access Twitter itself. It shows you the nature of regulation that we are dealing with. We are not only dealing with state regulation, we are dealing with self-regulation, individuals regulating themselves within the media space. Thank you, Anna, for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for closing just in time. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. We appreciate the discussion. And I think it's very good because sometimes they say civil societies should not work in silos. So you have a representative from the government and there's been interaction. And some of the ideas that we've shared can actually shape policy position on this issue, especially in our country. Thank you so much. Mr. Agbenga had to leave earlier and he has asked me to extend his apologies. Thank you. We'll continue these conversations and we hope that policies will be initiated to push some of the things that we've said forward. Thank you to the DG of the National Orientation Agency. Thank you to Ms. Abiodun Bayewu. Thank you to Nana Wachuku. Thank you. We so much appreciate all the participants for your questions and your contribution, and also to all the people that have worked on this behind the scenes, the IT team from the ICIR, members of the ICFJ Knights Fellowship team, and also especially to Mr. Dayo Ayeito for his support and for always being resourceful whenever we organize this platform. We can't thank you enough. Thank you, everyone. We'll bring this to a close, and please, you can check the recording of this on the ICIR social media page, and we'll continue the interactions, and hopefully we will start seeing changes that will be implemented. Thank you. Do have a great day.